Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out on this Wednesday morning. My name's Jay Voigt, and on behalf of the Colorado Provider Association, I'm going to be presenting on leading people like a boss. How are we going to thrive in the prevention, treatment, and recovery space? So just a little bit about me before we get started. I'm about motorcycle trips. I'm about being outside. I'm about friends and family, about being at conferences a lot lately. Um, so that's just me, but why should you listen to me today? What do I have? What do I know? Well, I've been in behavioral health for 20 years, and I've worked my way up through the ranks from being line staff all the way on up to executive director. So I have a lot of different vantage points. All the letters, the reason I'm put that on there is I went back to business school as an adult, and that was part of my leadership journey. But I'm also a licensed professional counselor and a certified addiction specialist. So I'm clinical, right? And then that last one, the SHRMCP, I went and got a certification to be a certified human resource professional. And that ties in with my story and what we'll be talking about today. So in 2022, I founded Human Capital Consulting, and essentially what we do is we help leaders develop high-performing teams. So we do all kinds of trainings and coaching and everything people operations. So we're like a blend of like clinical, business, and HR. So here's our agenda. Let's define leadership.
Yeah, I did.
I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Somebody not on mute.
I muted them.
Awesome. All right. Sorry, we'll unmute you later. But hey, let's define leadership. And let's talk about some traits and competencies that for leaders. Let's talk about leading teams and leadership development. And I wanted to wrap it up with talking about some leader burnout. It's hard to lead when we're crispy, right? And then we'll have about 10 minutes towards the end for some Q&A. All right, so 2024 landscape. Every organization is different, right? But generally speaking, a lot of organizations are really having trouble with the workforce shortage. We're seeing a trend of shifting employee expectations of employers, the newer generation entering the workforce in particular. They want to be treated differently. We're seeing a lot more virtual care demand and rapidly evolving reimbursement models. So these are some of the things that your organization might be focusing on or thinking about. Right now, employee retention is huge. And when we look at the graph here on the left, this is a recent graph from Becker Hospital Review. And we're looking at why are people choosing to stay in an organization? Right now, the organizational culture being the number one thing, that wasn't the case 10 years ago. Compensation would have been the top thing 10 years ago. But these are important things to stay on top of and be aware of. As far as leaders go, leaders are in short supply. Frankly, some leaders could really use a lot of help, but organizations are having a hard time finding leaders also. So that's part of why it's important to grow your own. So starting off, take a second, and I want you to think of what is a great leader. Who's a great leader that you've known or you've heard about? Maybe you had a favorite boss. What made him a great leader? Because when we think about it, different people define leadership in different ways. So here's a handful of leadership definitions from various places, and I know it's a lot of words, so I kind of highlighted and read some key things about these different definitions. Everyone defines leadership differently. There's a gazillion books on Google about leadership. I would say that leadership is personal, and I think it's important that we, as people interested in being leaders or currently leading or want to lead, really think about what we think leadership should look like. And that definition will change over time. I think Brene Brown did a pretty good job down here on the bottom. I like how she talked about taking responsibility or finding potential in people or in processes. But who got it best, the best definition of leadership, in my opinion, is Simon Sinek, right? So Simon Sinek has done a bunch of TED Talks. He wrote a bunch of books, and his leadership is the says his definition is leadership's awesome responsibility to see those around us rise. So that definition really resonates with me, right? I believe all boats rise with the tide. And when I look at my leadership career, I want to look back and see people rising with me. Um, and someone mentioned in the chat when we were getting started, but Simon Sinek made the statement, the best leaders are students of leadership. And there's a lot of reasons that rings true, and we'll get into some of those as we go on. If you haven't seen any of Simon Sinek's work, absolutely you should check it out. At the conclusion of the PowerPoint or a whole bunch of resources and links, and one of those is to some of Simon Sinek's work. So traits of great leaders. For the most part, like the research agrees that communication and self-awareness are, top traits or skills that a leader needs. But when you look at, these particular leaders, right, they're from all different kind of places. Intentionally didn't get anything that was political. Wasn't trying to get too polarized, but you recognize some of these leaders, you know them. Look at those traits. How many of these people have those traits, right? It's rare to find someone that has all of them. But these are the themes that tend to repeat themselves over time. So what kind of traits don't we want as leaders? So there was a Dutch researcher that did a meta-analysis of tons and tons of different leadership research, and these were his findings. What are the three traits that we don't want to see in leaders? And if you're like me, it's pretty easy for me to look back throughout my career and look at leaders I've come across and identify things that I don't like, right? These things are a lot more glaring, but sometimes it might come at the expense of overlooking some of the positive things that a leader has. These things can overshadow a leader so easily. If you think about it, a leader could be a great leader his whole entire career or her whole entire career. And then one mistake could blow it all, and that's what they'll be remembered for. So 4 key domains of leadership competency. So what I did is I kind of arranged into buckets. These are the buckets. And what we're going to do is go and dig in these different buckets. And these are all kind of the top skills that we see in leaders across industries. So I'm speaking more than just substance use disorder treatment world. So here's our first bucket, interpersonal skills. So communication is a theme that comes up over and over and over. And what I did was I delineated, different ways that we communicate, right? Verbal, right? Written, email, right? That's big. Nonverbal. This one comes out a lot of different ways. It could be the way we're presenting on the webinar. Could be how we're sitting in a meeting. Presentations. So, that's a leadership competency that as you grow throughout your leadership career, you're gonna probably be expected to do presentations. I know some of you might be going down to the Capitol today to testify. That was terrifying the first time I did it, right? I still don't like it, but I do it when I have to. And then how many think of listening as a communication skill? It is. Absolutely is. So the second interpersonal skill that we're looking at is empathy. And we're seeing a lot more research about empathy in the past 5-10 years. And they differentiate empathy into 2 different buckets. The first bucket is effective empathy, Can I identify how someone is feeling that I'm sitting with? Cognitive empathy is much more related to, as a leader, um, I might make a decision that we can't have raises this year. So cognitive empathy would be, what do I think the emotional reaction the team might have when they get this news? Right? So it's kind of more structural. Making sense, everybody? Some head nods. Cool. Um, so Sydney is going to be monitoring the chat. So please type some questions in the chat if you have any, and at the end we'll do our best to address them. So here's our second bucket, emotional intelligence, or EQ. This is also something that we've been hearing a lot more about in the past decade. So let's define it a little bit. So self-awareness, internal self-awareness, that much more relates to traditional self-awareness. What do I know about myself? What do I know about my experience? The external self-awareness, this is about understanding how I'm perceived, how what I do impacts certain situations, right? No one loves a tone-deaf leader. So that's the external self-awareness. Social awareness, when I think about that, I think about somebody's ability to read a room. Self-management, anyone ever have a boss that they were reluctant to share bad news with because they were worried they might be angry, or react in a certain kind of way? Self-management, how reined in am I emotionally? How stable am I? And then the last one, relationship management. So this has to do with looking at groups or teams or politics, um, kind of predicting how people are responding, what people like, what they don't. So it's tied in with kind of being able to read a room. But this graphic over here on the right, hopefully is helpful when you're looking at this stuff. So our third bucket is strategic thinking. So in terms of strategic thinking, this graphic over here, critical thought, right? Critical thought can be taught and developed, and essentially what you're doing is you're problem solving, and you're looking for different ways to achieve outcomes or whatever. Creative thinking is something that is exercised, right? What are the options? What are the possibilities? If I'm not a creative person, if I don't think outside the box, that would be difficult for me. Then systems thinking, this is best developed by working in systems. So one disadvantage people have when they work at one organization for a long period of time is they don't know how other organizations operate. System thinking gives you experience about how complex systems work. And so this whole concept of strategic thinking, it's layered on top of these three things. So our last bucket, change management, right? So part of leadership absolutely is change. You're not going to be really awesome at leading if you're not used to change. So digging into this a bit, adaptability. How flexible are we as leaders? Are we talking about the good old days and how things should be? And, are we talking about moving forward? Resilience. So one of the things that great leaders have is they have the ability to encounter roadblocks and problems, things that seem insurmountable, and they find ways around it. They find ways emotionally, cognitively to deal with it, but they find solutions that work. So that's a great segue into the, whole flexibility piece. Um, I'm thinking right now, for everybody on the phone, right? How much is your organization worried about money? And what's going on downtown in the sessions, what bills are being passed related to that? Who's thinking about value-based care and entering into those contracts and what that'll look like? It's a way different, whole different way of thinking about reimbursement. And then vision setting being the last thing. Um, it's no good if I know how to change, but I don't bring anybody with me. So on the right, this graph, so there's a famous Harvard professor, his name was John Kotter. And essentially, this was a model of change that he came up with. And I've found that this can be applied in a lot of different ways in a lot of different settings. So I'd encourage you to take a look, um, do a little research, dig into this. Most organizations are good at one or a couple of the things and not so good at other things. Um, Making it stick is a really hard deal, and there's a lot of reasons for that. That's a whole different webinar, but yeah, check out John Cotter. All right, so let's talk about leading teams. What do you need to know about leading teams? Right, here's a old famous football coach. I think he died in the 70s, Vince Lombardi. And I really like this quote because I think it underscores and disputes the notion that, leadership is a natural thing that, people just, fall into. I think that there are parts of leadership that you might be predisposed to. Um, It'll help you in the beginning, but as you grow on your leadership journey, you're going to find there's things you don't know how to do as you develop over time. And really, you're going to have to start putting in some hard effort, depending on, what your ambitions are and where you see yourself going. So here's a little graphic. What's the difference between a boss and a leader? I'll give you a second to kind of look through that and absorb that. I mean, nobody says, I want to be a boss and, I want to do all these negative things, right? We all aspire to do what's on the right-hand side. However, um, day in and day out, remember how I mentioned earlier, the one screw up you have, you could be judged for your whole career. That's what people remember. So leading other people. So this concept of human capital management, right? So the National Council of Nonprofits put out a document that kind of pulled together a bunch of different things that said, hey, as organizational leaders, these are all things that you need to do, best practices, if you will. So I'm not going to read them, line by line, but essentially, there's an undertone in here of using data to make decisions. It's about planning ahead. It used to be the organization will put a job ad up and says, hey, these are all the great things about us, come work for us. Effective job postings nowadays are more about you. What we're trying to attract somebody. This is what we're going to do for you. I mean, it might sound like I'm talking about the same thing, but the slant is more on the individual and the person, right? Everybody's interested in career development, and what's being offered, and that is a really important part of human capital management. The down here, the strengthen one, when we take a look at this, this was not the top thing 10 years ago, but since COVID happened, that work-life balance is shot to the top of why people work in certain places. The idea of having a flexible schedule, that's not negotiable anymore, right? And that makes it really hard if we're doing shift work, like working at a hospital or a residential treatment facility that has 24-hour staffing. Um, So leading other people, Google's put some time and energy into this, and it was called Project Oxygen. You can look it up. Essentially, what they did is they collected data and studied all their teams, and these were kind of their findings. When they looked at their high functioning teams, they noticed that the managers or the leaders were good at coaching people, right? There was autonomy. No one likes a micromanager. Um, Showing genuine interest in an employee's well-being. Um, Before the call, I was talking with Sydney a little bit about the concept of psychological safety. And that's a precursor to all these things, right? Um, listening to a team, incorporating feedback, helping employees with career development. So this stuff might seem intuitive, but out of all the things they looked at, 100 different domains, these were the themes. So when it comes to leading teams, what don't we want to do? So this slide is for you as kind of a quick reference. This is a little bit about kind of like organizational design, if you will. When employees are stressed, when they're experiencing burnout, usually what's happening is they're experiencing demands that don't meet their competency, skills, and resources. And so if we're asking them to do something where we don't meet their competency, skills, or resources, right, isn't that more about us as leaders rather than them? Looking at job design is pretty important. I think about some of you that are nonprofits on this call or smaller organizations. When somebody quits, who takes their duties, right? Usually one person assumes someone else's duty. Now they're wearing three hats. And sometimes it gets stuck that way. Um, so that's not really intentional job design, right? And that can create conflicts. I'm clearly defining responsibilities. Right, Brene Brown says to be clear is to be kind. We have to do that. The participate in a decision that affects jobs. What we mean by that is I'm telling somebody this is the outcome that I need, not necessarily the 10 steps that they need to get there, right? People want to have say in how they get the work done that they're doing. Here we go with communications popping up again. Such an important part of leadership. Um, I didn't think it was as big of a deal as it was until I, found myself as an organizational leader. I found that I had to put a lot more time and energy into communications than I had anticipated. Michael Scott in The Office. I don't know how many of you watch The Office, but I mean, there's so many clips from The Office that could apply to so many things. Um, so this is from a Harvard Business Review article, and they looked at what is it the leaders are doing that's stressing out their people, right? And this is what they found, these top five. And coincidentally, when you look at these top five, they're symptoms of burnout. Burnout bosses tend to accidentally stress out their employees, and that's how they do it. This is my reminder to take a quick water break. So I was part of my work is I do coaching with leaders and organizations, and there was an organization in a different state I was working with, and the leader wanted me to do coaching with like 6 or 7 of his high-level directors. And so what I did is I had to reach out to these folks, introduce myself, and um, send them a strength finder assessment and schedule a meeting. Well, this organizational leader didn't give people the heads up. So when they got an email from me, the response that most of them had was, this kind of pensive, like, am I in trouble? Did I do something wrong? Where it was absolutely the opposite, right? The leader was investing time and energy and money and wanted to help these people develop, but the leader didn't communicate that. So that was how that all came about, that, suspicion. So here's my TLDR about leadership development. So for you on the call, or for whoever you want to share this with, um, being authentic, teachable, and humble is so important. Nobody likes listening to somebody that's a big know-it-all. So part of being authentic is being vulnerable, right? Teachable, this whole like lifelong journey, leadership is a really complex thing. Takes a lifetime to master. Looking at skill gaps, how many of you on this call right now could say my leadership skill gaps are X or Y? Saw some hands raised up. Awesome, good for you. A lot of folks, that wasn't really an issue. Um, Identifying your skill gaps are huge. Lots of different ways that you can do that. Leadership 360 evals, getting mentorship, all kinds of stuff like that. What I want to caution you with as leaders, you can't have an open door and say you have an open door policy and expect that everyone's just going to come in and give you all kinds of feedback. It doesn't work that way. I wish it would work that way, but it doesn't. You have to develop a support system outside of your subordinates. Leadership is lonely. The higher you get, the more lonely it's going to get. And I think the lines get blurred in organizations where you have people that have been there for a long time. Maybe people have come through treatment together and they're working in an organization. You know, we've seen organizations where somebody treated somebody, right? You hire graduates of your program and now your counselor is maybe your boss, right? So there's all kinds of layers of complexity associated with that. For me, the most valuable thing that I've done in terms of leadership was getting a mentor. Um, Many of you are familiar with the concept of sponsorship, right? It's kind of similar. I've always had mentors, sought out mentors, and it could be a formal or informal arrangement, but it's really nice having a unbiased source outside of your organization that has experience, that's willing to invest in you. A more formal arrangement, could be like an executive coach. Um, so I do executive coaching, right? So executive coaching, it's not therapy. I'm a therapist, but when I'm doing coaching, I'm doing coaching. And those relationships are limited to looking at 30,000 feet, organizational strategy, a lot of skill development. So that's what you would get out of a coaching relationship. And then the last one, where are you getting your information from? It's so important to get information from different places, different cultures, different industries. I love learning about the military, for example. Like there's so many parallels from things happening in the military that can be applied in business. And then there's also things that are not so awesome about the military, right? So you got to take it with a grain of salt. In summary, the reason we have this little target here, there's somebody once said, the person that aims at nothing hits it every time. My challenge to you on this call is, what are you aiming for? What leadership skills or competencies are you aiming for? So practice, right? All this stuff comes with practice. What do great leaders, what are behaviors that great leaders practice? So from my perspective, these were some of the themes that, I've seen across my career. I think it's so important when you're leading other people to acknowledge and reward folks. That goes such a long way, regardless of the size of your organization. Providing feedback. How many of you have worked for an organization where you get like an annual review and that's all the information you get about your performance? Great leaders are continually providing feedback to folks in real time, weekly, monthly, regularly. In an ideal world, your annual or however often you do your performance review is not a surprise, and it's just a summary of what you've been doing this whole time. Asking better questions. How intentional are you as a leader when you're asking people questions? For example, when you say, how are you doing? Like you can expect people are going to say, fine, okay, good, whatever. Like it's just kind of a formality. Um, a much different question is, um, what's going well today? What's your favorite thing about today? What are you struggling about today? You want to ask questions that are going to get at the heart of what it is that you're looking for. Over communicate. So I'm talking about communication again. I'll stop with the over communication. You guys get that it's important. Never assume. So this can look a lot of different ways. So one story I have when it comes to, sorry, Sorry about that. So one story I have around that is, I was head of an organization once and people, um, wanted breakfast burritos as like, something at the staff meeting, right? So I brought breakfast burritos. A month later, they no longer wanted breakfast burritos, right? They wanted, I don't remember what it was, donuts. So I bring in the breakfast burritos and they don't love them and they're wishing they had donuts, right? Like what I'm thinking is, man, like that's not cool. That's so impolite. You're ungrateful. And maybe I was right about that. But as a leader, that's not what I should be expressing, right? As a leader, I should be finding out about people's preferences and checking in and expecting that things are going to rapidly change because they do. I can't get mad about that stuff. So now I know just to do that. Then the last one with leading others is, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, this is not optional. Like we've been talking a lot more about it in the past 5, 10 years, but like this is just good business practice. And especially as the workforce gets more diverse, um, we can expect that people are going to be bringing different experiences to the table. And we need to be much more mindful and thoughtful around all that. So with respect to leading self, um, are you making time to self-reflect? A lot of people don't. Learned it from other industries I mentioned. Where are you getting your feedback from? So it's hard to get feedback as a leader, so you need to seek it out. That could be one-on-ones you're having. It could be by asking better questions. Maybe if you have a board of directors, getting feedback from them. But you really should be seeking out feedback up and down. Everybody should have a written leader development plan. So some of you that raised your hand a while back saying, hey, I know what the skills or competencies are that I'm targeting. By writing it down, it makes it real. And then the last thing I'll say, about leading yourself is if you're comfortable, you're not doing it right. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt that said, do something that scares you every day. She was talking about getting out of her comfort zone. Some of the most valuable leadership lessons that I've experienced were, painful. And pushing the envelope was something that really helped me grow. So I'd encourage you to do the same. So, kind of winding down, let's talk about burnout prevention. So, for all you leaders on the phone, the number one thing you can do to prevent burnout for yourself, but this also applies to your employees, is exercise. I was talking to a neuropsychologist, at the Winter Symposium a couple of weeks back, and I was doing a presentation on stress and resilience, and this guy's dissertation was on burnout in the workplace. And essentially, what he said was exercise is the single most important thing you can do to prevent getting burnout. And his recommendation was 4 times a week for 30 minutes is what folks should be doing in terms of exercise. And I won't bore you with all the crazy neuroscience, but essentially what he was saying was, um, the human species has evolved over time and technologically, like things have gone nuts in the past 100 years. A lot of our work now is sedentary, right? We're behind screens and, exercise, especially in America, right? We don't walk nearly as much as people do in other countries, right? We're way too sedentary. And so that exercise, there's tons of things that happen in the body that mitigate stress and burnout. So that was his plug. I already talked a little bit about quality mentorship and coaching. Um, but what if I framed it in a way that said, you need to get a good quality mentor or coach because you're going to suck as a leader if you don't. You're going to burn out, right? That's a different way of looking at it versus, oh, I want to proactively do this because I think it'll make me better. What about if you don't do it, it'll make you worse? Is that a different way of looking at it? So in terms of mentorship, it doesn't have to be for money. You can find people within COPA, within other professional organizations, civic groups. What I always did was I found organizational leaders that were available. And I would just ask them, hey, can we meet? And sometimes it turned into a formal thing, sometimes it didn't. For those of you that have boards, that can be a really great tool. In my experience, board members are, they want to give, they want to be helpful. And sometimes it's hard for them to figure out how to do that. If you, as an organizational leader, were to approach a board member and say, hey, I'd like to get together regularly and learn what you know, there's a 90% chance that they're going to end up saying yes, right? And then the last bullet point about preventing burnout for you is growing trusted leaders. So you're on a team, you have people that you work with. Have you considered that the people you invest the time and energy in, that you're growing them so they can handle responsibilities that you don't have to? Yes, it takes a lot longer to train someone to do something, but if you teach them to do it and they do it right, there's a time save there. I don't know who said it, but somebody once said, with respect to teams and organizations, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right. And so what that means to me is I can do something pretty quick and get it done on my own. But if I want to go far, if I want to make something stick, if I want to make lasting change, that's where involving the team in the process. So an example I'll give related to that. I once worked for an organization and we had our annual open enrollment. And what I did was I had 3 different health plan options, and I grabbed a couple key people from across the organization, right? Leaders in different departments, and I sat them down and had the insurance broker come in and present to them, here are the options. And I asked the leaders, hey, I want to know what you think. Just to be clear, I will be making a final decision. This isn't a vote, but I weigh your input, right? I had to set the expectation that what I was going to do with the information I gave them. So they gave me their feedback, and it turns out, I didn't assume, it turns out they picked the plan I didn't think they were gonna do. Turns out we ended up going with that plan. That would not have happened had we not done that. That would not have happened had I assumed, hey, this is what everybody's gonna want. So, all right, I mentioned before that there's a bunch of resources at the end. I'm going to scroll to one slide real quick, and then we'll come back and do the Q&A. So this is a survey that was published on LinkedIn 2 years ago. And I think it really illustrates that point that I was talking about, being a leader and not assuming. How is it that so many leaders can get it wrong, that so many leaders can be out of touch? And these are some of the issues, some of the things that, popped up most frequently, right? So on the left, or I'm sorry, on the right, remember this was 2 years ago, good wages was like the number one thing that people were focused on 2 years ago. But when you asked employees, right, they ranked it as, or was good wages 5. Right, there's a mismatch. And so you guys can access this later and use it on your own, but never assume. So let's scroll back up. Looks like we got about 15 minutes left. Sydney, let me turn it over to you. You've been monitoring the chat. You want to fire some questions at me?
So we don't have any questions in the chat, but I was thinking about something that you said that I just wanted to comment on. When it comes to feedback in leadership roles, seeking feedback has become one of my favorite parts of the job. And because I've had a lot of opportunities from the membership to like learn what they're thinking about what I'm doing, I would say that in your leadership role, like learning how to take feedback is also really important. Part of character growth for me was learning not to take negative feedback personally, because my job with that feedback is to figure out what can be better next time. I received some really negative feedback about an event I hosted and they presented for. And I spent the first time this happened, I spent like a weekend feeling sorry for myself. And then I realized like, hey, this isn't productive. Like, it's not the end of the world that you received some negative feedback. And I have so many opportunities ahead of myself to do better next time. And they just gave me a roadmap for it. And you know, on top of that, they trusted me enough to tell me the truth. So if they were honest with their feedback, then I need to honor that and like see what I can do better next time, not just for them, but for everybody. So learning how to take feedback is super important.
That's a great point, Sydney. In my experience, it's really hard to get good feedback and I have to tee it up. Sometimes it's related to the questions I ask. If I ask you, hey, do you have any feedback for me? That's open-ended. If I ask, what was your favorite thing and what's something you think I could do better? It's more pointed and it opens the door, makes it easier for people to do exactly that. I love surveys. I think it's important to get data a lot of different ways. So employee satisfaction or employee engagement surveys are
Good
real.
afternoon, this is Justin with Oxford House.
Go ahead.
There was a mute issue.
No worries. Another question.
Yeah, Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, so many of us are running smaller organizations where there's a ton of things to do. The roles and responsibilities can be a little confusing. How do you approach that? Like I have one full-time employee, and both of us kind of do everything. We just went through a mentorship training to kind of go through it, but we got a mentor, or we got a mediator, kind of a coach, to help us kind of like decipher who's doing what, and we found that to be very helpful. But as we grow, we don't necessarily have the funding to add another person on for certain responsibilities. So as a leader, how do you divvy up responsibilities in a way that is fair?
That's a great question, Darren. I'll have to answer generally because I don't know all the nuances of your organization, right? Because they're all super different. But I would say it kind of starts with your strategic plan. Right? And if everything's important, nothing's important. Like you only have so much. So, right, it's the organizational design piece is really looking at what are the key things that I have to do? Where can I save time? You know, so for example, Darren, one thing that saved me a ton of time is spending $10 a month on the program Calendly. So if someone wants to schedule a meeting with me, they just click this button and it automatically schedules it. It saves an email back and forth and all this fun stuff. So I think using tech and innovation can be a real helpful way to do it. But I would start off with kind of prioritizing based on what your strategic plan is. I hope that was helpful, but it's probably a little more complicated than that for you.
Well, if I could do a follow-up real quick before you go, Gino, sorry. So in that, there's just so many things that come in that don't fit into our little, what we've sectioned off. And I generally will assume those. And then I find out later that my, program manager, they're like, oh, I can handle that. But I don't want to just assume that they can handle that. So how do you approach that in a way that is inviting them, but not obligating them?
I would do a time study, Darren. Get a whiteboard out. Put your responsibilities up, have them put their responsibilities up. And kind of it'll make a graphic showing, how you're spending your time. If you both do something like that, sometimes visually seeing it can be super helpful, but then there's no assuming at all because he or she is putting up whatever it is that they do. Another thing you can do is do a sticky note exercise where you kind of move the sticky notes around. So let's just say payroll is a responsibility and I have it. Well, maybe, my manager person says, you know what, I can do that. Move it over to their column. Then you have this big board and you can see, how everything is divvied up. So that could be helpful for you to give something like that a try.
Hey, Gino, go ahead.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I just want to start by saying thank you for this. This is really great. I'm really happy you guys organized this and I joined it. This is some really good content, and I'm wondering if the recording will be available later. But my question, one of the things that I've been struggling with the leaders of my organization, the different divisions, um, really is just like ownership and execution. Like I meet with them and they do a decent job of identifying different problems sometimes, and I mean I trust them, and they identify problems, but they don't always come up with solutions. And even if they do come up with like some ideas for solutions, they're not like owning the situation. Like uh I need to get this done, and this is what needs to happen, and they almost kind of like think that somebody else is going to do it. And so I was wondering, what kind of strategies you would recommend for just instilling that, that ownership and that strategic execution mentality in people.
Yeah, great question, Gino. Very, very common. So what we're talking about is buy-in, right? We're talking about some people refer to as extreme ownership, right? Part of how I progressed throughout my career,
Yes.
I always owned things. I didn't say no, and they said, "You want to do this?" I said yes, right? They could depend on me to do so, and it makes it more challenging when you're across space, right? So if it's like they're remote or not someone that you work with all the time, um, I think that's absolutely a thing. I think it really kind of boils down to how that person is managed and how that organization communicates what the expectations are, right? Um, I think about job interviews almost as like contracts. If I'm hiring you, I'm making it clear in the interview, like, I want you to own this. And then when we're meeting for supervision or consultation or whatever you want to call it, we're reviewing that regularly, whether it's weekly, whether it's monthly. One of the most frustrating things as a leader is people bringing me problems. I want people to bring me solutions, right? And sometimes just calling that out, hey, I hear you're right, that's a problem. Um, I want you to come back next week with a couple solutions, right? Putting it on that person to come up with that. Or saying, I want you to work through this problem. Let me pair you up with some other people and they can tell you how they solved it. I know it sounds real basic, but it works. Another thing I've done in the past is I've used agendas. If I say you got to make an agenda before you come meet with me, Gino, makes you think about what we're going to talk about. And if on your agenda are all problems, and I call that out, I guarantee you your agenda is going to change over time and you're going to start putting down some options, right? Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's super helpful. I'm actually doing a meeting slash training with them today. So this is perfect timing on all this. And sorry, one more follow-up question. It's like a lot of times I personally, maybe this is just a personal issue, but sometimes I feel like maybe fearful or have reservations about being clear with those expectations, because it's like at the end of the day, those leaders are, needed. And it's like if they were to, I'm afraid, like, what if I offend them, or what if I'm a little too harsh with them, and then they just up and quit, and then I'm in a bad situation.
Yeah, especially now with the way the
Think
workforce
about
is,
that.
right? Yeah, Gino, I think the short answer to that and to most other things is going to be it's all about the relationship. Take them out to coffee, take them out to lunch, get to know these people. You got to get to a place where you can have those difficult conversations. And that takes time and energy. And you got 99 things to do that might not be the top of your list. But that invested in relationships, it's never a bad idea.
For sure. No, thank you. This is super helpful. Definitely know your stuff.
Thanks, Gino. Jonathan DiCarlo has a question in the chat. Jay, could you talk a little about the opportunity towards solution of working on leadership while in leadership? Similar to the relationship between working on a business and working in a business, growing leadership requires both, but prioritization of such investments are important and easily overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. The TLDR on that one is put time on your calendar, an hour once a week to read books or articles or look at videos on leadership. You have to set that time aside. We've talked about mentorship and how important that is. Getting a coach. Another thing, if your organization can, support and pay for that, I think that that's huge. I've never met a leader that was like bored or not busy, right? Like leaders have 99 problems going on at all times, but like Darren was talking about earlier, divvying up responsibilities. Um, if you're committed to growing as a leader, you got to put down time for you to personally develop, for you to be creative, for you to turn off the email, turn off the phone, and really focus up and invest in yourself. Um, Documentaries on Netflix, that might be your extent. When I'd mentioned before that I went back to school as an adult, right, to get an MBA because I wanted to learn more about leadership among other things. And I used to play like the articles I was supposed to read, I would play them in my car during my commute back and forth, right? I was making the most of my time. Get creative. If we're all doing like the neurologist said we should, exercising 4 times a week for 30 minutes, that's a great time to find a podcast or something like that related to leadership. But yeah, you got to build it in.
Can you mention your top 3 leadership books just for us to get started on that?
Yeah, so in the slide, my top book is Adaptive Leadership. So I'll send you guys the slide deck so you'll have it there. Um, and the reason that's my favorite book is essentially it's written in a way where it talks about a skill and then it tells you how to go practice it. So it's like that with like 100 different skills. Um, is people like when we hear a motivational speech or see something that's really cool, like it sticks with us for a minute and then we lose it. And the idea with adaptive leadership is we want to be great leaders. We're going to encounter so many different things. We need a big toolbox. We need lots of different skills that we can pull out. And like everything that we talked about today, it's all a matter of practice, right? Great leaders aren't born. So that book, Adaptive Leadership, frames things up in a way where we can pick certain skills or abilities that resonate with what we're trying to do and then go practice them. But yeah, I mean, How to Win Friends and Influence People with Dale Carnegie, right? Like that's a classic. There's a lot of stuff there. People in our field love Brene Brown and other fields. Brene, I think she's pretty spot on most of her stuff. Simon Sinek, the guy that in the beginning, he has like 4 or 5 books. I highly recommend him.
Jay, we have one more question in the chat before we go. I believe this is Rich Montoya. He says, I have a leadership human services degree with One Sober Living. What's next?
Be careful what you ask for, Rich. That's how I ended up getting an MBA. Remember how I said I'm always seeking out mentorships and leadership and all that stuff? Well, there's this crusty old psychiatrist that was this big academic, and I was talking to him about leadership or something like that. And he challenged me and said, well, what are you learning now? And what I was thinking was, dude, you know how busy I am? Like I work at 3 different locations. I got this stuff. What are you talking about? What am I learning now? But he was right. And that reflection kind of got me thinking, hey, the money seems pretty important with respect to how decisions are made. Maybe I should go to business school, learn more about that so I can have a bigger voice. And honestly, that's how I ended up going to business school. I didn't care about any of that nonsense, but asking that question, Rich, that's how I ended up here. So be careful what you ask for, man. Look like we're at time, Sydney.
Yeah, we are. Thank you guys so much for all of your amazing questions, and your suggestions on resources and books. I would love to include those in the email once we send off that recording, because we'll give you guys a recording of this and all of the resources. So you have all of the things to continue your leadership journey. Thank you so much for being here today.
Good job, Sydney. This was a good job. Yay.
Yay. And thank you so much, Jay. Really appreciate that you provided this to everybody. Do you want to, I sent you the list of people who were in attendance today. Do you want to send off those resources and that the slide deck, because the recording is going to take a while since it has to process first.
Sure. Yep. I'll send out an email today. So everyone that registered, I have your address and you'll get a copy of the deck. But yeah, best of luck to you on your leadership journey. And I'm a resource, so feel free to reach out to me. Love to chat with you. Thanks for your time and have an awesome day.
Thank you so much, everybody.